Okay, so while the video is running, I don't want to be late on time, so I will go on with the next panel. Next panel is going to be about global and regional energy security, challenges and opportunities. For our moderator, I want to call Eser Özdil, non-resident fellow of the Atlantic Council, to the stage, please. And for our speakers, I want to call Mr. Şevki Acuner, former chairman of the supervisory board of Ukrenergo, NPC Ukrenergo Ukraine. Dr. Zeynep Elif Yıldızel, vice president of the Association of Geological Researchers, Turkey. Mr. Onur Ünlü, CEO of Eskon Enerji and president of EODER. Torsten Woller, minister counselor of Energy EU delegation to Ukraine. Anna Giyar Sashko, Associate International Arbitration Group of Shearman and Sterling, LLP, Paris.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you very much being with us in this very important panel. I would like to thank to all organizers and the panelists. Especially this is a very timely event, I believe, because the energy is in the hot topic of the global agendas right now, especially after the war between Russia and Ukraine. The energy became more and more important topic to all countries because of the prices and supply security discussions. So today we have a very high caliber panelists having direct experiences in the ground. So I think we will have very fruitful discussions, even though we are in the second day and afternoon. So I briefly would like to introduce you to our panelists and not spend much time to go to discussions. First of all, we have Dr. Zeynep Elif Yıldızel. Elif Yıldızel is a very well-known expert in upstream industry in Turkey. We know each other for probably more than 15 years. We had many common projects before. She will talk about the importance of Ukraine in global energy security. We have Şevki Acuner. Şevki Bey is the former chairman of the supervisory board of Ukrenerji. He has direct experiences in the ground in Ukraine, and he is one of the closest observers in the energy transition in Ukraine. So I think his contributions will be very, very important for us to understand the current state of play in Ukraine. We have Onur Ünlü. He is the CEO of Eskon Enerji and he is president of EODER. He has a very extensive knowledge about renewable energy, performance contracts, green transition processes, so his contribution will basically on the green energy side and energy transition. We have Torsten Woller. He is the Minister Consul Energy Delegation to Ukraine. Like Şevki Bey, I think he is one of the most closest observer of the energy transition in Ukraine, both from policy side as well as the market side. So his contributions will be quite critical, especially I will have some questions to him about the current status in EU and what EU is thinking about the global energy security and EU energy security as well. Last but not least, we have Anna Giyar Sashko from International Arbitration Group, Shearman Sterling LLP Paris, and we will get legal perspective and her opinions about the current activities in Ukraine. So I would like to start with Zeynep Hanım because she is going to give us a broad introductory speech about the importance of Ukraine in global energy security and what's going on right now, especially in Europe, in Ukraine, and in Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Özdil. Okay. Today I'm going to talk about the global impacts of Ukraine crisis concerning the energy security. As we know, Ukraine is an important supply on energy, minerals and foods to the global markets. This is the fact that we know today. And by this crisis, the world is facing an important food and energy supply problem, and securing these items became more vital than ever. The minerals and mining is also important in the global supplies of the world because in 21st century products that we're using today are all made up from minerals and metals. So we are facing the price increases in all goods because when the crisis has set up by Russia, when Russia invaded Ukraine, the markets, global oil and gas markets, skyrocketed the prices. That's the fact, we know. And Ukraine is one of the key economies to the global markets, as said, and Ukraine holds 5% of the minerals of the whole world, mineral resources, and the mineral resources are mostly for industrialization. Ukraine holds a small amount of oil and the second natural gas resources of Europe. But besides these resources, Ukraine is very important to Europe and to global markets because it's a transition country from the gas coming from Russia to Europe. So she is a vital role in energy transition, transportation. And Ukraine has the largest pipelines. It's about 45,000 kilometers something, and 72 compressor stations with 13 underground gas storage, which is very vital to especially Europe. But having problems on these flows from Russia to Europe, not only Europe is affected, the whole globe is affected by the price increases. So this event made us to rethink or remember the energy security again as a globe, because we forgot the energy security in the climate change topic. We are in a dilemma whether we're going to make our net zero targets or whether we have to secure our energy. Of course, climate change is very important because concerning the increase in sea level due to climate changes will make millions of people displaced, and displaced due to rising sea level, of losing land and losing agricultural area, and this will be a very dramatic result for increasing of the sea level. So we found out that by this crisis, the confusion of energy independency with energy security. Yeah, we were trying to be independent in energy by countries. Each country tries to do that, but we forget about the energy security. So, what can I say? I mean, we found out that the energy security is a major concern, and globalization is another concern on this issue. And when we come to Russia, Russia inputs 4.3 million barrels of oil and 210 BCM of natural gas annually into the energy system of the globe, and 2.5 million of oil per day, and 142 BCM of natural gas flows to Europe in the system via Belarus and Ukraine. And there are so many IOCs, oil and gas companies, and other companies out of this oil and gas sector running in Russia. So we are facing a very important issue. Not only Ukraine, but the globe itself is facing an important issue especially concerning the energy. And if we try to put sanctions on Russia, or if we enlarge sanctions on Russia, then the oil and gas, concerning the oil and gas subject, will find its way to Asia, because Asia is still in the market, and I don't believe that Asia will be in the sanctioning club. So we are really facing a challenging new coming months. So the problem is for the oil and gas, if can EU replace its demand from OPEC Plus or from Iran or from non-OPEC producers? Yeah, they can replace somehow, but the problem is there is a production capacity for each country supplying oil. Although we can increase some production, that the demand will not be replaced by those increases. And the European countries turn out to LNG, and the spot market in LNG rised up very dramatically. And Ukraine also, I mean, Ukraine exports approximately $70 billion of everything, goods, and 50% of this export goes to Europe. So As the war is ongoing, Ukraine economy will be badly affected. That's what we are talking about since 2 days, and this effect will be in a domino structure to the other countries that are working directly with Ukraine and buying goods or raw materials from Ukraine. So the supply chain is always in a disruption, and that's what we're talking about since 2 days. Also, Ukraine has a workforce problem, as mentioned before. So, as everybody said, then what shall we do? We should invest in Ukraine, not only in logistics or the other consumption goods or construction, but we have to take into consideration about oil and gas, and we have underground gas storages that are being run in Ukraine, and those storages should be filled up before the winter comes. So that's a big challenge. So what we're going to do is not very clear in energy consumption, and when Europe wants to replace its replace its demand, then the prices are rising up. So everybody is affected by inflation and by increasing prices in the goods. Because, you know, oil and gas, it's not only for transportation or for energy, it's also the refined products from oil. We have 80,000 refined products from oil, so increase in oil prices will make increase in goods goods that are being produced from those refined oil products. So the majority of the Ukraine's mining industry should be raised up, and the important other thing is Ukraine is an unexplored country, and I think more exploration should be done in these basins that Ukraine has. You know, after the Crimea invasion, Russia wanted to enlarge its economic exclusive zone in Black Sea, rising from the Crimea water shores. So majority of the production in Ukraine is on the offshore of Black Sea. So that's another major point, political point that we are going to face in the coming months. And we have to invest in oil and gas business also more than ever, because while we are thinking about the climate, yes, the climate change is very important, but we have to make our energy secured, because we're going to face a winter in the coming months. But plus, our industries, heavy industries, cannot be run with renewables, because when you have a steel factory, you cannot run it on basic renewables, or when you have a glass factory and something like that. So we need to secure our energy. That's what I'm going to mention, or what I'm going to emphasize.
Thank you very much, Zeynep. It was a very informative opening speech to understand the Ukraine's position as well as the global energy security dynamics. To understand, we know that the Ukraine has been following very ambitious policies to market liberalization and transform its energy industry. And EU is one of the key counterparties, especially from regulatory framework as well as the market integration. And after especially annexation of the Crimea from natural gas wise, actually Ukraine stopped almost all imports from Russia and diverted to Europe. So can you give us a framework how EU contributed to Ukraine's energy transition in the last 10 years, for example?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very important event, and also for inviting me. And thank you very much to all people who are still with us, even though it's the second day and in the afternoon. I hope it's interesting, because the energy sector in Ukraine is one of these examples that we are in a time of really transformative shifts. You can even compare to an earthquake. We are in the middle of an earthquake, and we don't know yet where these shifts will end. I mean, what tectonic shifts we will see. 10 years ago, Ukraine was essentially 100% dependent on oil, on gas, and from Russia and Belarus. It was fully connected, integrated in the electricity system. Now, 10 years on, Ukraine is still, or before the war started now, But in the beginning of February, 80% of imports of oil products came from Russia, Belarus. But gas was purchased on the European market, and now we also have the connection of the electricity grids between Ukraine, Moldova, which is also part of the same system, with the European Union's NSOE network. This was done it was a long-term process. It was prepared starting in 2016, but now because of the war it was sped up. It should have happened end of next year, but now as an emergency measure and also as a sign of support and solidarity with Ukraine, all the members of NSOE, including Turkey, agreed to have this emergency connection, the synchronization, which means that we are in an energy field, we are now getting more and more integrated. Ukraine and the European Union are getting more integrated. And we are also working on market rules, which is based on joint rules of the European energy community to make this work, to really present business opportunities for this. And I think this could be interesting also for businesses here, because these rules are well known. These are essentially more or less the same rules that we have in the European Union, we have it in the Western Balkans, we have it in Ukraine and Moldova. And it also provides stability for investors. Now, of course, it's a very difficult time with war, but the framework has changed dramatically, and we have managed, because of these rules, to de-geopolitize to a certain extent energy supplies, even though we are in a very, very difficult moment of geopolitics and energy. When you see now about, just yesterday, Nord Stream 1 started operations, but only at 30–40% of the normal level. Nobody can explain you why. Today it may be 20% or 50%. So we are really in this kind of completely geopolitical world of energy supplies. But even there's more predictability in the energy system in Ukraine now than 10 years ago. Because we have rules for gas storage, so European traders have already used Ukrainian gas storages, which are, I think, the biggest in Europe. We have now a situation that during the war, when we connected our electricity grids, the idea was that in case of need, Europe can help Ukraine to maintain stability in the electricity system. Now we see the opposite effect. Because of the war, a lot of industrial capacity has been destroyed by Russian attacks. So there's much less electricity demand now. And Ukraine has started to export electricity to the European Union, which is a win-win because it helps Ukraine to generate revenues, but it also helps to bring prices down in the European market. And currently it's Romania and Slovakia who are profiting from this. And these tectonic shifts, we don't know yet where we will end up, but this is irreversible. And the current situation of uncertainty also presents a lot of opportunities. And I'm very glad that also Turkish companies were very active already in the investments in renewables, because the big chance of Ukraine as a country is to turn itself from an importer of fossil energy, which it has traditionally always been, to an exporter of green energy. So, and this is for electricity, but also we are now working, for instance, on biomethane, because everybody wants to replace natural gas, especially from Russia. So for Ukraine, there's a huge opportunity to do this domestically, but also to export biomethane, if it's certified, etc., as a value-added product to the European market. And for this, there is a lot of industrial potential in Ukraine, but also I think there's a lot of openness for international investors to come to this sector and to develop it in the spirit of integrating the energy systems. I will stop here and we can continue then.
Yeah, definitely, because at this stage I want to turn to Şevki Bey, because he was one of the practitioners in this transformation, let's say, process. And I know that all transformation comes with tremendous challenges. I'm following the Ukrainian market probably more than 15 years actually, since 2007. And when Ukrainian governments, let's say, announced market liberalization processes, unbundling processes, there was a big debate in the society, especially on the rising prices, new investment requirements, new technology requirements, etc. So Şevki Bey, probably you encountered with all of these questions and all of these problems in your career. So what were the fundamental challenges you have encountered in this transformation process in Ukraine, and what kind of opportunities you see for the future?
Thank you for the floor, and thank you for the arrangements. I think the most fundamental transformational challenge was getting the market structure and operability right. And I have to say that the original design was not necessarily working very well, and created a lot of distorted picture and situations in the market. I can name, for example, the payment mechanism where Ukrenergo, the transit system operator which I headed, was responsible for financial shortcomings or non-payments from distribution companies, and we ended up having over $1 billion of accumulated payables to green energy producers. One aspect of this, the other aspect of this was the extraordinarily generous tariffs, feed-in tariffs that are provided to green energy, all right, of course, to promote investment, because this was really the starship, the admiral, you know, the most important driver of foreign direct investment in Ukraine for a while. Turkish companies have, you know, together with, you know, a few other Norways and a few other countries, led that initiative of investment from abroad into the sector. But that created again the quasi-bankruptcy of the system. And, you know, these kind of distortions, of course, create enormous rant for a few of the very well-known oligarchs in the country that at the time had their own MPs in the parliament and affected the legislation. So correcting these over time, and the new government is also making, I think, great headway, a new administration in addressing these things, were great challenges. But I also have to mention a few other challenges that I think Ukraine faces, and I'm sure other panelists will eventually touch on that, is the energy efficiency issue. Ukraine consumes at least 2.5 times more energy per output of GDP compared to the European countries, and that is an enormous waste of resource and money. At EBRD, we, as Torsten knows well, and we collaborated very closely in financing investments to improve the efficiency at energy users, manufacturing plants, even retailers where they want to change their lighting system to more efficient energy consumers. So this energy efficiency issue still, I think, is a challenge for the existing new government to address. Along with these, as a part of this, comes the issue of affordability of energy for the ordinary Ukrainians, because when you have such a high cost component of production, and when you look at the disposable income levels, that creates its own social problems and therefore again political interventions and then consequent distortions. So it's like a vicious circle of challenges that we're talking about. One thing I want to point out, particularly in reference to the comment that you made about energy security, which has to be the most, in today's world, policy option for any country, should not necessarily mean energy independence. If you are dependent on like-minded, democratically operating principled countries, that interdependency is quite okay. Because otherwise you end up having to pay a tremendous amount of money for your energy security, and you might not even get there, because I think we have seen it in the case of when Texas, that was the state of Texas in the United States, was disconnected from the rest of the grid system in the United States, and as we all know, something happened somewhere, and the whole state was out of power for quite some time. So the point I want to tie all this in the energy security is the great achievement that Torsten has referred to. And Torsten, for probably you know that, but it's interesting for audience to know, the final technical tests to pass the NSOE acceptance were actually completed on the 23rd, the day before the Russian attack on Ukraine. So by divine intervention, that was out of the way before the bully of the region, the vicious tyrant, attacked our beloved Ukraine. But this integration into NSOE is very much this energy security that Ukraine needs to have, and it of course is a mutual game. It also provides, as you say, benefits for Ukraine's neighbors and members of the energy community. So I don't want to sort of take too much time, but when you look at the components of primary energy, the coal, the renewables, the hydro, and in the case of Ukraine, nuclear and oil and gas, it is clear that each of these sectors, while you need to have a coherent energy transformation policy and implementation actions, would need their own specific solutions that need to be designed. So there's a lot of issues to be addressed by the policymakers, by the technical people, technicians, by the people of Ukrenergo, Naftagaz, and all those colleagues to sort out. So I'll stop here, and I think we can have a discussion as opposed to just long talks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Definitely. I certainly agree with you about integration of Ukraine with European energy systems, because if Ukraine hadn't taken that measures before, most probably the situation would have been very catastrophic today because of energy supply or energy income or energy security. I certainly agree with you. And I don't want to steer the philosophical discussion, but again, I cannot be more agree with you than no one is an independent energy island today in the world. So even though, for example, the current case in Turkey, we continue directly importing gas from Russia, and we are not expecting any problem for the winter. But since the Russian invasion in Ukraine, steering the oil prices up in international markets, and actually Turkey also needs spot LNG in the wintertime, most probably we will have a very difficult situation to find spot LNG, and all the prices are rising. So again, even if you don't have direct physical flow problem, at the end of the day the prices are affecting to you, and which is also equally related with the energy security, because if prices are not affordable, even we cannot talk about the supply security. So in this time, actually, I want to turn to Onur Bey, because we'll talk about hydrocarbons, we'll talk about market integration, we'll talk about transformation in Ukraine, and now I want to return to the expert in the energy efficiency and the renewable side. So we know that in Ukraine has huge potential on the renewables. There are some Turkish investors already invested in solar energy. And as Şevki Bey explained, that Ukraine in overall as a country needs huge efficiency measures. So can you please elaborate how the energy efficiency can help country or countries to increase their supply security, decrease their energy bills, as well as how countries in the future should attract new investors to the renewable energy side.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to share the floor with these distinguished panelists. You know, the world ecosystem is changing. It's changing dramatically to tackle climate change. It all started with COVID first. This what so-called earthquake in the world ecosystem. Then we see supply and demand measures change. We see freight costs went higher, energy prices go over the roof, and it all ended up with Russian invasion on Ukraine. So not only we have three obstacles right now. One of them is the climate change. The second one is, as panelists mentioned, energy security. The third one is, as you mentioned, is the energy prices. So at the end of the day, we use the most out of the energy, because when we look at the climate change issue, the emissions increase very dramatically. Even though we thought after COVID, we went to our homes, we closed the offices and everything, we thought that the emissions will go lower, but we have the record numbers on the emissions, so it's not the case. The world is depending very much on energy, and the source for emissions is like 75% on the energy production itself. So we have to make the most out of the energy we produce or we use. That's the scenario. As you mentioned, because of the increasing energy prices, if we look at Turkey paid like $54 billion at most in the past, but if we look at today, the first 6 months is $48 billion. So it's going dramatically high. When we look at on the energy efficiency side, energy efficiency is seen as the first fuel on tackling climate change, and it's seen as the newest renewable energy source. So that's quite critical. International Energy Agency thinks that 40% of emission reduction will come from energy efficiency itself. Why it's that important? When we look at the industries, even in Ukraine, it's quite the same. Existing ones are usually old technology, because when you invest on a new plant, the previous discussion was inviting all the investors to Ukraine to have these factories. So initial goal for a new investor is to produce that product in the factory. So it's not that how much energy you consume. So whether it's a new factory or an old one, there is a huge potential. When we make the calculations that are rising from the studies that we have done in the field, we see that there is a almost 35 to 40% of energy savings in the industry. When you add it up to domestic usage of energy, there's a huge potential there. The important issue is that we have to keep in mind that, as Mr. Şevki mentioned about the BRD's approach, there are energy service companies in the field, in Europe, in Turkey, in Ukraine, who can also cover the initial investment there and share the savings, so investors or the factory owners or the building owners, they don't have to pay anything for that sort of improvement. When we look at renewable energy, of course, Ukraine has a huge potential with the greenfields and the industries with the roofs, and that also helps both the emission reduction and the energy security as well. And when we look at the technologies that are driven in the near future, is mainly focusing on heat pumps, ORC systems. So those are due to the fact that, like, we would like to change our cars from fuel to electricity, we need to try to switch the factories to consume more electricity than fossil fuels. So if we want to do that, we need to find a good source for electricity, and Ukraine has a huge potential there with the renewable energy. That's what I believe. I also believe that in the near future, with the new developments on energy storage, battery systems and everything, these renewable energy systems will not only be available throughout the daytime, but you can easily store the energy produced and use it in the nighttime as well. So we see a great potential there. There's a huge potential not only for Ukrainian companies, but for the companies who would like, for the countries who would like to support Ukraine as well. And that way we can easily reduce the energy imports of Ukraine as well as Turkey. Thank you.
Very crucial intervention. With the current energy prices, I think almost all projects are feasible. Yeah. Well, when I reviewed the last 5 projects in my own businesses, the one is the green hydrogen. And like 2 years ago, I do remember very well that we were saying for the green hydrogen, to make the feasibility of the green hydrogen, we need to wait another 10 or 15 years. Now it's feasible with the current prices. I reviewed another project about the storage, battery storage integration to the grid. And I was saying again, like 2 years ago, probably we have to wait another 10 to 15 years, and still they are becoming feasible. Most of the projects are becoming very feasible, but the question mark is still how long the gas prices will be that high. Because this is a big question mark, and still with the recession, expectations are becoming more and more grand in the global economies. So expectations to drop in energy prices also will be another issue. And if you look at the historical chart between the correlation of gas prices as well as oil prices, it totally diverged because of the geopolitical risk right now. The market is basically pricing the geopolitical risk. That's why actually the prices are high. I'm also very optimistic on renewable energy side, renewable energy technologies, but still the question mark will be how long that oil and gas prices will remain high. I don't know. So last but not least, I would like to turn to Anna for her intervention before going to Q&A session. Please, floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you. I would like also to thank the audience to stay with us in the afternoon. My topic is quite controversial because I know that business does not like to discuss disputes or even to think about disputes, but this is a part of the reality. It's no doubt that the Russian invasion of Ukraine will have a far-reaching impact on the global energy system, disrupting chain of supply. And today we see already that the general picture has changed for governments, for companies, for investors, and they are trying to navigate in the new reality. Even before the war, disputes were quite common in the energy sector. The disputes usually high-stake, political, involving different aspects, technical aspects, regulatory aspects. So what are the disputes, what are the risks we are contemplating already, and we will see in the near future? First, sanctions. And sanctions, very obvious point for the sanctions, you need to exit Russia or how you exit Russia, but some companies decide to continue business with Russia, and here we see these companies trying to navigate not to held liable for the violation of sanction regulations. On the other side, Russia adopted measures, countermeasures against unfriendly countries in the European Union. And even more, now if you want to sue a Russian party, a Russian company, if you have a dispute, it's become even difficult to appoint an arbitrator. For example, ICC in Paris now just inventing schemes how to receive payment or to pay a Russian arbitrator. In Ukraine, we continue not only fight in war, but economic fight, which is very important. And I think it's nearly 1 week ago, an advisor to the president, sent a letter to 4 international banks, JP Morgan, Citigroup, HSBC, and Société Générale, requesting them to stop financing Russia, to exit Russian companies, and especially not even to grant any loans. And in this letter, this person explains that you are committing war crimes, because while financing Russian oil companies, Russian oil industry, you are financing war against Ukraine. Once the war will be over, these banks will be sued by the Ukrainian Ministry of Justice for war crimes, and currently the Security Service of Ukraine is collecting data on these banks. We know that you cannot sue a legal person before the International Criminal Court, but still you can sue management of these banks. So I think it's very new, creative approach, but we will see what will happen after the war. But as for now, the Ukrainian government already announced that companies, banks involved in business with Russia would not be able to participate in the reconstruction of Ukraine. Another potential, not only disputes, but general projects that are taking place, that are already in place, it's how to change the system and how to create more possibilities to avoid using Russian fuel. We have a Repower EU initiative by the European Union with the aim to stop using Russian energy by 2030. And as a part of this initiative, some countries like Germany, Greece have already announced construction of the LNG terminals. Other countries also considering, for example, Estonia is planning to build floating storage and another LNG facility. And also recently, US and the European Union revealed a deal that would allow the US to export more LNG to Europe. And other countries declared their intention to build more facilities, to use renewable energy. In France, Emmanuel Macron, the president, announced plans to build more nuclear power plants in the near future. So here we have very short time frames for this very important plan. So I think that we will see more disputes, but also I think it's a great opportunity for Turkish construction companies to come to France, to come to Europe, and really, inshallah, let's see. So I think that as we don't have enough time, and really thank you for this event, and if you would like to help Ukraine spread the word about the event, because we see on LinkedIn, on Facebook, it's very important to keep speaking not only about the war, but about the future of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, for your remarks, and I would like to thank all the panelists. Before asking my questions, I would like to return to audiences because we have limited time. And if there is a question or if any comment from the audiences, I would like to give the priority. Yeah, there's one gentleman over there.
Yes, thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. All of you mentioned about the gas, about hydrogen, about electricity, but none of you have mentioned about the 55% of Ukraine's energy area, I mean the nuclear energy. I would be very much appreciated to look from you, your point of view, what kind of future for nuclear energy do you see in Ukraine? And yeah, looking forward for it. Thank you.
Who wants to take this question?
I can have a go and then...
Sure.
It's clear that Ukraine is going to use, as it has been, nuclear energy as one of the main powers, and then I think we've all read about the contract with Westinghouse being increased from 5 to 10 reactors or turbines with Energoatom. The issue with nuclear until now was, again, that you had the dependency on the supplier of nuclear fuel. But that is obviously being gradually addressed, and my guess is that nuclear will continue to play this very dominant role. The renewable energy is, as the auction system is now set to work to bring the prices to competitive levels from the exorbitant levels they were. There will be a good mix with the storage capacity that's being added as well. So, in short, I think nuclear energy will have a continued significant role, but I think probably you want to say something.
Yes, I want to add something about nuclear energy. Ukraine and we are on the same boat on nuclear energy because ours is being constructed and yours was constructed by Russian technology. So we're dependent on Russia on nuclear technology issue. The problem, if we want to cope with the climate, we need a controllable and sustainable energy, which is the nuclear power plants. The problem with the nuclear power plants, as everybody knows, when you have the capacity to produce the uranium to be used in nuclear power plants, then you have the capacity to produce nuclear bombs. That's what few countries have this ability in globe, starting with Russia, United Kingdom, United States, and so forth. Few countries with France and Japan. So I believe that the next coming decades, let's say, will be powered by nuclear. So we have to invest, or we have to find some way to invest in nuclear technology, because personally, I don't believe in renewables that we can run our countries on on nature-driven energies, because we're talking about the climate is going to change, and we're trying to put our grid system onto the changing climate. The climate will not only change by itself; it will change by sunning times, by sea level rises, by wind flow lines, let's say. So we're trying to make us dependent on nature, and we're talking about the nature change. This is a dilemma that we're facing for. And I have one more comment to you. You said we don't expect to have the oil and gas prices rise up. No, because since 2014, when the oil prices fell down to $30, investments were halted in EMP, exploration and production. And since 2014, I've been constantly telling that we need to increase investment in EMP, because we're going to face the next coming decade a shortage of oil and gas production. So due to oil prices, EMP investments, capital investments were halted. And in 2018 and 2019, the oil prices were trying to rise up, and they came approximately $60 to $80 per barrel at that level. And then the Paris climate agreement was signed, and that agreement has halted 35% of the investment in EMP again. So we are facing, or we are going to face, the shortage of oil and gas production in the coming decades. Of course, everybody knows by 2020 the COVID decreased the demand, and then the prices fall again. So another period to halt the EMP investments. So we're going to face shortage about oil and gas in the coming decades. So I don't expect that their prices will be lowered down in the next coming decades.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Before going to the nuclear question, which is really very important and very interesting, just I wanted to highlight one thing which also was addressed in the previous panel. We see really a separation of ways between Ukraine on the one side and Russia, Belarus on the other side. We see it in the energy sector, in the outlook, in the modernization tendency, also in the market integration. They're really going apart. And I think this is something which many investors have not yet really internalized also in their organizational structure. For them, this is one market, but this is no longer the reality. And I suppose it will become more and more clear, and I think the sooner companies adopt this approach, and I'm German, and I know lots of German companies traditionally have run this Eastern European business from Moscow. This will not work, just as a general remark, and in energy we see it very, very clearly. On nuclear, unfortunately we have now a new concern, which is the security concern because of the war. And we have all followed with horror what is happening in Zaporizhia. And this is one question which, of course, Ukraine will have to live with somehow. So nobody knows really how this will end. So it is not only the traditional concerns of where do I get the fuel, because Ukraine has made a lot of progress there. Already now, half of the fuel comes from Westinghouse, half the fuel comes from 12, from Russia. So diversification. I think Ukraine is the only country who has really systematically worked on fuel diversification for Soviet-built or Russian-built nuclear reactors. And I think this is also an example for other countries to really seriously consider. It's possible. Of course, it has a price, but it's possible. And Ukraine shows that you can do this with a technology that also other countries are employing. The main question, I mean, for Ukraine, the power plants, they are in the rhythm of lifetime prolongation. So Energoatom is working on this, and until, let's say, 10, 15 years, probably they will run on mostly on existing capacity. The big question is how this capacity will be replaced. And this is not unique to Ukraine. That's a big question for countries like France, etc., who all build nuclear reactors more or less at the same time. And then the question is, of course, of technology cost. And this is something very difficult to predict. I mean, I have seen various of numbers, and this will also be of relevance for Ukraine, because if you are in a common market, in a wider European market, more or less the same rules apply, because you will have more and more harmonization of prices, of cost. Hopefully, Ukraine will also have no longer the increased country risk, because especially for new build, capital cost is critical. So if you only have 1-2% more capital cost for nuclear power plant, it becomes really expensive. So that's very difficult to answer, but in the short run for Ukraine, the existing fleet will continue. At least this is the planning of the government. And the real short-term question is the war. And that's something, and we have seen there seems to be a war tactic of Russia, because the first thing they did, they came to Chernobyl, to the nuclear zone, to the radioactive, let's say, contaminated zone, just to reach Kiev, because they knew nobody will fight in this zone, because you have radiological risks. They dedicated, sent people or troops to conquer Zaporizhia, and they were on the way to conquer South Ukrainian nuclear power plants, which were then defeated. So that seems to be a war tactic. To my knowledge, that's the first time in the history of war that nuclear power plants are used as a target in a war and potentially as a weapon. And this is something which I think we have not yet really internalized, unfortunately.
That's critical. Also, one more remark. We see more and more, especially US-based SMR companies are active in the Balkan and Southeastern European countries. So probably SMR technology will further develop in the years to come. And also, in addition to your comments, I think the nuclear will be with us in the future as well. I think we have 3 minutes, or 1 minute to go, and there's one gentleman here as well. I want to give the floor to him.
Hi, I have a question. How do you think, is green hydrogen able to replace natural gas? And also, I'm curious, what do you think about, can we produce hydrogen using electricity from nuclear power plant, and after that storage it in underground storages, and for Ukraine can become European hydrogen hub and export hydrogen to Europe instead of natural gas?
You go ahead. You volunteer? No, you don't. Yes, thanks a lot for the question, because actually we have between the European Union and Ukraine, we have what we call a Green Deal dialogue. And one of these main components is what will we do on developing the hydrogen market. And there the idea is that Ukraine will participate fully in the development of a new market. So it's not joining an existing market with existing rules, but really creating it from scratch. And one of the priorities was what do we do about green hydrogen, because the market is not yet there. There's a political will, a political ambition to create such a market in the EU, and especially in some advanced countries like Germany. We were planning, actually it should have started by now, a big study, a technical study, how to use Ukraine's gas pipeline network for transporting hydrogen, different options, mixes or pure hydrogen. Also with the gas storage operator, how to store hydrogen at a big scale. And the idea was to use the existing infrastructure to make Ukraine a green hydrogen hub for the supply internally. And also we had, for instance, Mariupol was supposed to be a pilot. Exactly the Azovstal plant, there should have been a wind park producing green hydrogen. Part of it was supposed to be used by a green steel line in Azovstal, and part of it was supposed to go probably by river barges to the Danube and then up to Germany. So that was, and there were talks with Siemens, and I think even EBRD was approached. So, I mean, we were seriously thinking about it, working on it. We had the political support from our side, from all sides, and in the EU hydrogen strategy, Ukraine is mentioned as a key partner, and in the Hydrogen Alliance of the European Union, Ukraine is a member, and the aim was that 8 to 10 BCM of hydrogen would be produced by Ukraine, but it was just an intention. So we see this as very promising, and as you said, there's a huge potential. But now, of course, we have to reassess also after the damages to the war, what will happen, also what will happen to the investments that, for instance, Turkish companies have already done. Yeah, because the renewable energy or renewable electricity production is the basis for all these new business models.
Thank you. We used 2 more minutes extra, so I want to stop here because there are other panels as well. Thank you very much for joining me today.